Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Millennial Project. Today we are going to start in on our next set of Hollywood sign interviews, which showcase the rarely talked about pro-access residents who live below the sign. Much of the ongoing coverage about the sign issue tends to focus on residents who want to shut down access, who want to shut down viewing points, who want to make it impossible for tourists or other people in Los Angeles to get into the park via Beachwood Canyon or Lake Hollywood Estates. But what most people don't know is that there is actually this contingent of residents in Beachwood Canyon who feel very strongly that access should remain open to all. Some of these residents bought their homes in the area specifically because they wanted to be able to walk into the park every day. Other residents feel like it's more of a kind of park access issue, that people who might not have Griffith Park in their backyard should be able to come to Beachwood Canyon from other parts of the city and access those trails, that urban wilderness that people love so much about Griffith Park. So today we are going to start off these pro-access interviews by talking to Tony Castanares, who is a longtime resident of Beachwood Canyon. And I wanted to talk to Tony first because I think that much like Chris O'Brien and Sarah Jane Schwartz, two other residents that I interviewed who lean a little bit more anti-access, Tony has lived in the area long enough to see it transform. So he knows about the public safety issues, he knows about the tourism issues, he's experienced all of that, he's been present for a lot of the discussions and the meetings about all of that stuff. But he still has come to a very different conclusion about how the city should address this ongoing Hollywood sign issue. In addition to that, Tony is also a retired commercial trial lawyer by trade. And so I think his experience as a lawyer gives him the unique ability to put forward a diligently constructed, logical, and thoughtful argument for why access to the sign's hiking trail should remain open via Beachwood Canyon. I want to get right into Tony's interview, but before we do that, I need to say just a few quick things. So first of all, this is a little bit of a longer interview, and so in order to make it easier for you to get through the interview or to find parts that you might want to reference back to, I have put notes with a description of Tony's argument and timestamps into the description of this video. Secondly, there is a little bit of an audio issue. Later in the interview, I had to switch from one mic to another mic. It sounds a little bit weird for a second as your ears kind of acclimate. The mics, although they were recording the same audio, record that audio differently. So I appreciate you bearing with me for that, and hopefully it won't happen again in the future. Last but not least, please remember that if you like what you see today, you can stay up to date with the Millennial Project's latest videos by subscribing to the show on YouTube or liking the page on Facebook. Also, feel free to share what we're doing with your friends, your family, your neighbors, etc., because getting shares and a little extra views always helps with these Hollywood sign videos. I love researching this stuff. I love looking into it. I love talking to people about it. And the more views I get, the more I can do on the Hollywood sign. All right, with all that out of the way, we can finally dive into our first pro-access interview with Tony Castanares.
My name is Tony Castanares. I've lived in Beachwood Canyon for 34 years. I've lived all my life except for school in Los Angeles, and for almost all that time at a place where I could walk into Griffith Park out my front door without getting in a car. When I bought this house 34 years ago, before I made an offer on it, I came up here to make sure I was able to walk into Griffith Park from here because it mattered to me and I like to use it. I use Griffith Park at least 5 times a week. It's a matter of interest to me to preserve our access to Griffith Park because I think the ability to walk out my front door into Griffith Park is one of the really nice amenities of living here. There's no question that a number of my neighbors has been inconvenienced by the increased traffic and the increased popularity of the sign. Those people definitely have a point. I'm hopeful that relief can be brought to them without necessitating the closure of access to all of us here. So that's my basic interest in the issue.
I was curious if you could explain kind of the issue from start to finish, if that makes any sense, because there's a lot of people that have different ways of looking at this issue from the ground up. So I was curious how you look at it.
Okay. Well, when I was a kid growing up, the Hollywood sign was just sort of a curiosity that was out there. People would say, oh yeah, the Hollywood sign, ha ha. And it was falling down and it was in a great state of disrepair. And over the years, it's become an icon, and it's become the Eiffel Tower of Los Angeles. And if you go to Europe or other parts of the world right now and people say, oh yeah, I've been to Los Angeles, what did you see? The first thing they all say, the Hollywood sign. As long as I've lived here, people would come, they speak all kinds of different languages, and they want to know, how do you get to the Hollywood sign? And I'd always tell people, well, it's not legal to walk to the sign itself. You can walk above it. I can give you walking directions, or I can give you directions to a place where you can get a good view of it and take a picture. Most people, I think, who are tourists, for the most part, and want a picture, they want the picture you get from Beachwood Drive with all the utility wires in it that you see in zillions of movies, or they want some of the pictures that are closer up that you can get from within this canyon. This house looks at the Hollywood sign, but there are some other places, and the Vista Point over above Lake Hollywood gets a really spectacular view of the sign. I think people aren't happy with pictures that show the Hollywood sign as a little tiny thing in the distance, and so efforts to make them go get pictures from the observatory or from Hollywood and Highland or whatever aren't going to work. People have GPSs these days, and they know where to go to get the best pictures and how to get up here, and they're going to come up Beachwood Canyon. So I think that the problem is to try to find a balance of solving the problems of congestion and yet not denying access to not only ourselves that live around here, but this is a public park and people are using Griffith Park. And ultimately, I think the increased popularity of the sign has brought tourist dollars to not just the city, but the Hollywood Chamber of Commerce and the Sign Trust. Whoever makes money out of the sign and out of tourism has profited by this. That money has not gone into providing relief to the local community. And I think we are paying a price for that increased popularity without any of the benefit from it. And I think that one thing that we all ought to be able to agree upon is that the city and those who are profiting by the increased tourism and interest in the sign owe it to us, really, to help us out and not make us bear the entire brunt of it. It seems to me like, for example, a really first-rate professional traffic study of the whole situation and what the possible solutions to it are is called for here. And I think that's the very least that the city could do for us is to get that sort of thing going, because most of the arguments you hear right now are based in large part on speculation and not really on facts. So it would be nice if no matter how much we disagree, we at least could be all talking based upon facts.
So there are a few kind of crisis points in the neighborhood, right? So you have the Beachwood Trailhead, the Lake Hollywood Vista, top of Deronda. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about what your kind of response to the current claim that they should be closed legally is.
Okay, so let me take all three of those things one at a time. Let's talk about what you're calling the Beachwood Trailhead and what used to be called the Holly Ridge Trail. I think that the Holly Ridge Trail, which is the trail that I came and looked at when I bought this house, that trail has existed since time immemorial, I think. It certainly is referred to in a 1991 hiking guide to Los Angeles. That refers people to taking the Holly Ridge Trail. The trail shows on the federal topo map, the USGS survey map, that was updated in 1966. So it's certainly been there for a very, very, very long time. Then in 2001 or 2, it was determined, and I think to everybody's surprise, including the city, that the entrance to that trail was on private land. And the person who owned that private land was going to build a house and block off that access, which is in fact exactly what happened. And the people here, including the local homeowners association that I think you're aware of, the HHA, didn't like the fact that we were losing our access in our trail. So our city councilman Tom LaBonge, took it upon himself to try to remedy the situation. And what he did was to move the access point from Holly Ridge Drive, where it was closing, up to city property on Beachwood Drive. And so a little trail was cut, or a little access trail to the main Holly Ridge Trail was cut there. It effectively moved the trailhead a few hundred feet from private property to city property, and that was opened up and everybody was happy about it. That happened in 2002. Then all of this congestion began to happen. And there's no question that it caused a great deal of problems at the top of Beachwood Drive. The people who live at the top of Beachwood Drive were greatly inconvenienced by this because parking is allowed on both sides of Beachwood Drive. There are no sidewalks, and on really popular days, people would be driving up there looking for parking places, hesitating, trying to parallel park, people walking right up the middle of the road because there are no sidewalks, and then people trying to drive one way or the other, and you had an unholy traffic jam. Well, what happened was they brought in the PPDs and prohibited parking except permit holders on weekends and holidays, and that has hugely improved the situation on weekends and holidays. There have been a few days, like between Christmas and New Year's, that aren't officially holidays, and a lot of people are in town for the Rose Bowl, etc., that got pretty crowded up here too. But that solved that problem. Now, the Parks Department, I don't know whether it was as a result of agitation or just because coincidentally it decided to do this, decided to build a gate below the new trail access. And during the time that they were building the gate, ostensibly for public safety reasons, they closed access to the trail. That period took about 10 months. And finally, in, I think, January of 2015, it was reopened, which was promised from the beginning. They said, we'll reopen this trail as soon as we get the gate constructed. And I think that the people who are agitating for closure of the trail and who argue that the trailhead is illegal are saying that the reopening of the trail violated the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. The problem that they have with this is that no matter what else they say, you have to bring an action under CEQA within 6 months of the event that you claim violated it. And whatever it was that they claimed didn't happen within 6 months of the time they brought this lawsuit. So as I have read the complaint, lengthy complaint, and I have read the demurrer that the city filed to the complaint. And just to put that into non-legalese, when you are sued and you're filing the paper that you file as a defendant, you can file an answer which says, I admit this and I deny those facts. Or you can file a demurrer which says, Your Honor, even if everything he says is true, he still loses. I'm not liable. And the city has filed a demurrer saying the statute of limitations prohibits this action under CEQA. It's a 6-month reach back, and all they can really allege that happened within that 6 months was that Tom LaBonge held a press conference to announce the reopening of the trail. But the trail had been open really since probably the 20s. So and the new trailhead had been open since at least 2002. So that's the Beachwood Holly Ridge Trail story. Deronda is a very, very narrow, small street on the other side of this canyon. But if you drive to the top of Deronda, it gets you as close as you can get by car to the place that you would walk up to Mount Lee above the Hollywood sign and look out over the city, over the top of the Hollywood sign from behind, which is what you can do on foot legally. So that became a big problem too. A little earlier than the big problem happened at the top of Holly Ridge, because the problem with Deronda is it's a very narrow little windy street and it comes to a dead end, and there's not really a good turnaround at the end of it. So cars would go up there and they couldn't get turned around, and you wound up with a complete gridlock up there all the time. I don't know what a traffic study would show, but it's very hard to believe that there's any way you can allow a serious amount of traffic up Deronda. The Vista Point is a place on the street, and on one side of the street is Griffith Park, and on the other side of the street it is city property. I believe it's DWP property, part of the Lake Hollywood complex, but it has always been probably the best view of the Hollywood sign one can get from a city street. You can go down Beachwood Drive and you see a lot of people standing in the street taking pictures, but the Hollywood sign is then like this. This is the Hollywood sign up close and in your face, in the background of your picture. The people who object to the Vista Point constantly put the word illegal in front of the word Vista Point every time they use it. I have publicly challenged that. I don't know what it is that they claim is illegal about it. Once again, if it's CEQA that they claim that the city somehow violated, I think the only thing they could claim that the city has ever done is to clear some brush. And I don't think that's something that is a CEQA violation, but it certainly didn't happen within the last 6 months. So again, there's a real statute of limitations problem on anything that's happened there. nonetheless, there's objection to that vista point. I think that most of the objection to it is based upon a belief that somehow we could make this all go away. That somehow we could make the tourists and hikers and everything not want to come here anymore. I don't think that's realistic myself. They're all going to come. The GPS is here to stay. And I think almost no matter what people do to try to divert people other places, this is the view of the Hollywood sign that everybody wants. And I think we have to live with that. And as I've said before, I think this isn't just an issue of the Hollywood sign. If I go hiking in this park on a weekday or a weekend these days, it used to be I'd go up and I hardly see anybody. Now the trails are flooded with people. People want to use this park. And personally, I think that's something desirable. I have always thought it's just an absolutely wonderful thing that we have this park, which is about as close to wilderness as you can get, that's right plunked down in the middle of a city, right in the middle of the urban core of the city is this wilderness park. And that's true despite the fact that the studies seem to show that Los Angeles is one of the least well-served cities in terms of park acreage per capita. We nonetheless have this wonderful thing, and I think people have discovered it more and are using it more.
Okay, so I think that's pretty much all I have. I think that was interesting just to get kind of the context of the neighborhood.
Can I say one more thing?
Oh, yeah, anything you want.
So, one of the things that I think about all of what's happening here, and I've said this to you, not maybe in this interview today, but in previous discussions we've had, is the complexity of the number of interests that there are here. There are the people who live at the top of Beachwood who are affected by the Beachwood Trail, people who live at the top of Deronda, there are the people who look down upon the Vista Point, there are the people who want to park on Beachwood. And for example, I used to be able on a Sunday to go visit our neighbors across the canyon and park there. Well, I can't do that either anymore because the preferred parking districts are street by street. So I have a permit to park in front of my own house on Sunday. But if I want to go visit my neighbor across the canyon who lives on a different street, I can't do that. Putting in the preferred parking districts at the top of Beachwood Drive has meant that people who are hikers, not necessarily tourists who want pictures, but hikers, have come, instead of parking up at the top, they just hike another half a mile and park down below where the preferred parking districts are. That happens to be an area of Beachwood Drive down there where there are apartments. Those apartments were put in at a time when there was no requirement of building parking. So if you now all of a sudden flood lower Beachwood with cars, yes, you've alleviated the problem in upper Beachwood, but there are cars down there. If you put in preferred parking districts, where do the people park who want to go to the market or to the cafe or to the cleaners or whatever down there? This affects those little businesses which have been there forever and which have interests. Everything you do or everything you fail to do has different impacts on different people, some of which are favorable to them and some of which are unfavorable to them. And I think that the approach that we've taken in this canyon so far has been to display anger and loud voices, and this bothers me, and that's pretty much the only approach that we've taken. And I think it's, number one, given us a bad reputation. I think people think of Beachwood as we're all selfish and NIMBYs and so forth. And I think it hasn't been productive. I think we have been rude and nasty to city councilmen and to journalists and people who are actually in a position to help us if they so choose. And our rudeness and nastiness has perhaps led them not to so choose. I would like to see us get on a different footing in the way we, who are affected by all this, approach it. And I think I would put it this way. Number one, I would like to see everybody adopt what I think, which is that everybody who is interested in this, I am willing to assume, is interested in good faith in solving these problems for almost everybody. And no matter how much I disagree with somebody who says what to me is the most offensive thing at all, close the trails, no matter how much I disagree with these people, I would like to say I'm willing to assume that they make their argument in good faith. Number two, I would like to say every interest is a valid interest. The interest of the people who live at the top of Beachwood, the interest of the people who live in Compton and want to come up here and hike, the interest of the businesses, all of these interests are valid interests. And I think that what we really need to do is to try to come together and come to some sort of, I guess I'd call it utilitarian calculus, greatest good for the greatest number out of all this. Nothing we do is going to please everybody. But I think if we were to start with what we can agree upon, I don't think anybody would disagree with what I said much earlier in this interview, which is that the city and others who are profiting by this increased tourist traffic owe it to us to help us out and not leave us to our own devices in this. And I think that almost nobody would disagree with what I said. I think should be the first step. The city ought to commission a serious traffic study up here to find out really what effectiveness would happen from any given remedy that we might think. If we closed the trail, what would really happen? If we closed off Deronda Drive, what would really happen? Once we've gotten that, maybe we can come together on some further common ground. But ultimately, we're going to have to come together and try to present a reasonable and unified voice. And I think that what we have been presenting, which is loud voices and anger, has been counterproductive to actually solving the problems we've got up here.